I'm standing in my husband's office lobby right now, pretending to check my phone. Across from me, near the reception desk, is the most vulgar escort I could find on the internet. In approximately 90 seconds, she's going to ask for David Miller, my cheating husband, and describe in vivid detail the appointment he supposedly booked with her. Actually, let me back up. You're probably wondering how a woman like me ended up hiding in her husband's office building, orchestrating public humiliation with a woman who advertises herself as your worst HR nightmare. Fair question. Let me start at the beginning. My name is Angela Miller. Well, it's Angela Parker again now, but we'll get to that. 12 years ago, I was Angela Parker, fresh out of college with a business degree, and the kind of optimism that makes me cringe a little when I think about it now. Not that optimism is bad, it's just that mine was the particularly naive variety that assumed everyone meant what they said. I met David at a friend's barbecue. He was 27, I was 25. He worked as a junior analyst at Henderson Financial, which sounds impressive until you realize it's basically corporate speak for really good at Excel spreadsheets. But David had ambition. God, did he have ambition. He talked about his 5-year plan, his 10-year plan, his vision for climbing the corporate ladder. I found it attractive. This is the part where I'm supposed to say I should have seen the red flags, but honestly, there weren't any. Not then. David was charming. He asked questions about my life, my goals, my dreams. He laughed at my jokes. He brought me coffee the way I liked it, without me having to remind him. When he proposed after a year of dating, I said yes without hesitation. The wedding was lovely. Nothing too extravagant, which I appreciated. David's mother cried. My father gave a toast about finding your partner in life. David promised we'd be partners in everything, and I believed him. Unfortunately for me, David's definition of partners turned out to be more like one CEO and one unpaid personal assistant. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The first year of marriage was actually good. We were both working. I had a position at a marketing firm that I genuinely enjoyed. We split bills, made decisions together, argued occasionally about normal things like whose turn it was to clean the bathroom. You know, the kind of boring equality that functional relationships are built on. Then David got his first promotion. Looking back, that's when things started to shift. It was subtle at first. So subtle I didn't even notice it happening. David started working longer hours, which made sense. More responsibility, more demands. I picked up more of the household tasks because, well, he was tired when he got home. That seemed reasonable. Angela, you're amazing, he'd say, kissing my forehead while I cleaned up after dinner. I couldn't do this without you. I felt appreciated, valued, like I was contributing to our shared success. What I didn't realize was that I was auditioning for a role I never applied for, the devoted wife who makes her husband look good. 6 months after that first promotion, David suggested I quit my job. We were having dinner, something I'd cooked, naturally, because David's new position meant he was too mentally exhausted to think about meal planning. He reached across the table and took my hand, giving me that smile that used to make my stomach flutter. I've been thinking, he said. My career is really taking off right now. I'm up for another promotion, and the hours are only going to get crazier. It would be so helpful if you could focus on managing our home life, just for a while, until things stabilize. You want me to quit my job? I asked, surprised. Not forever, he assured me quickly, just for now. Think about it. No more stress about your commute, no more answering to that micromanaging boss of yours. You could focus on things that actually matter. Plus, I'm making enough now that we don't need your income. The way he said need made something in my chest tighten, but I pushed the feeling down. What about my career? I asked. I worked hard for this position. David squeezed my hand. Angela, I know you care about your work, but let's be honest. You're in marketing for a mid-sized company. I'm on track to make partner at one of the biggest financial firms in the state. Our future is in my career, not yours. I should have thrown my wine in his face. I should have asked him who the hell he thought he was, deciding which careers mattered. I should have recognized that moment for what it was, the first brick in the wall he was building around me. Instead, I said, let me think about it. A month later, I quit my job. In my defense, and I know how pathetic this sounds. His arguments made a certain kind of sense at the time. He was making good money. I was tired of my boss. Managing our household was becoming harder with both of us working long hours. And David promised it was temporary. Just until things settle down, he said. Then you can go back to work, pursue whatever you want. Spoiler alert, things never settled down. They only got worse. But in those first few months of unemployment, I actually felt okay. I organized our home. I cooked elaborate meals. I finally had time to see friends, visit family, read books I'd been meaning to get to. David seemed happy, which made me happy. Then he started managing our finances. It makes sense for me to handle this, David explained one evening, setting up automatic transfers from our joint account. I understand investment strategies, tax optimization, all that stuff. You're great at so many things, Angela, but let's face it, numbers aren't your strong suit. I have a business degree, I reminded him. From 8 years ago, he replied, not even looking up from his laptop. The financial landscape has changed. Trust me, this is better for both of us. Within 3 months, my name was removed from most of our accounts. For simplification purposes, David explained. He set up an allowance for me, actual allowance, like I was a teenager, transferred to a separate account for household expenses. This way you don't have to worry about accidentally overspending, he said, as if he were doing me a favor. The allowance was generous at first, but it came with an unspoken caveat. I had to justify every purchase. $40 at Target, David would say, reviewing our statements like an auditor. What did you buy? Cleaning supplies, some groceries, a birthday card for my mother. Couldn't you have found a cheaper card? They're like $5 at Target. That's excessive for something people throw away. These conversations became routine. David questioning my spending, me defending purchases of toilet paper and laundry detergent like I was embezzling funds. The allowance gradually decreased, not because we couldn't afford it, but because David decided I was wasteful. Meanwhile, he bought a new suit every month. For work, he'd say, as if that made it different. The criticism started small. Are you wearing that to the company dinner? David asked, looking at my dress with a slight frown. What's wrong with it? Nothing. It's just a little casual, maybe? I don't want you to feel underdressed compared to the other wives. So I changed into something more appropriate, which David also critiqued. Maybe not that much jewelry. You don't want to look like you're trying too hard. At the dinner itself, he introduced me to his colleagues with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This is my wife, Angela. She keeps everything running at home while I focus on work. One of the wives tried to engage me in conversation about a recent book she'd read. Before I could respond, David interjected. Angela's not much of a reader these days. Too busy with housework, right, honey? I wasn't too busy. I'd actually read 3 books that month. But contradicting David in front of his colleagues felt like some kind of betrayal, so I smiled and nodded. You were so quiet tonight, David said on the drive home. You barely said anything. People are going to think you're stuck up. I was quiet because every time I opened my mouth, you shut me down, I thought. But what I said was, sorry, I'll do better next time. And that became the pattern. David would criticize me, undermine me, or speak for me in public. Then he'd criticize me for not being engaging enough. It was a game I couldn't win, so eventually I stopped trying. I became what he wanted, silent, decorative, efficiently domestic. In other words, invisible. The jokes started around year 4. We were at a dinner party hosted by David's boss. I was doing my best to be present, but not prominent, the careful balance David seemed to require. Someone mentioned a recent stock market fluctuation, and I made an offhand comment about how it reminded me of the 2008 patterns I'd studied in college. David laughed. Actually laughed, like I'd told a hilarious joke. Angela's great with domestic stuff, he announced to the table, but don't ask her about the stock market. Everyone else laughed too, because that's what you do when the boss's up-and-coming protege makes a joke. Never mind that my comment was accurate. Never mind that I'd spent 4 years studying business and economics. I was just saying, I started. Honey, it's okay, David interrupted, patting my hand like I was a child who'd said something cute and wrong. No one expects you to keep up with this stuff. The humiliation burned in my chest, but I smiled. I always smiled. That became his go-to move. Whenever I contributed to a conversation, David would joke about my intelligence, my understanding, my relevance. And because he framed it as affectionate teasing, I was the bad guy if I objected. "Can't you take a joke?" he'd say later if I brought it up. "Everyone knows I love you. You're being too sensitive." So I stopped contributing to conversations. I stopped having opinions in public. I became exactly what David's jokes implied I was: decorative and dumb. The really twisted part? I started believing it myself. By year 6, I had no friends left. This wasn't an accident. David had systematically pruned away every relationship I had outside of him, all while making it seem like my choice. "Your college friends are still doing bar crawls?" he'd say with a slight sneer. "Don't you think you've outgrown that phase?" Or, "Another girls' weekend? I thought we were saving for the house renovation." Never mind that David went golfing with his colleagues every other weekend. Those were networking opportunities, apparently. My friendships were wastes of time and money. The worst part was that he was so reasonable about it. He never forbade me from seeing anyone. He just made it so exhausting that eventually I stopped trying. I'd make plans with my friend Jessica, and David would suddenly have a work emergency. "I need you to handle the catering for the dinner party tonight. I know you said you had plans, but this is important for my career." After the 3rd or 4th time of canceling on Jessica, she stopped inviting me. Can't say I blame her. If I were her, I'd have written me off as flaky too. My family was harder for David to eliminate, but he found ways. "Do we really have to go to your parents' place for Thanksgiving?" he'd sigh. "My mother is heartbroken that we're not spending it with her." "We spent last Thanksgiving with your mother." "Who's keeping score?" David would say, somehow making me feel petty for remembering basic facts. "I just think you could be more considerate of my family's feelings." When I went to family gatherings alone, David would punish me with silence for days afterward. Nothing overt, just enough coldness that I felt the disapproval radiating off him like heat from a furnace. "You always choose them over supporting my career," he'd finally say, making me the villain for wanting to see my own parents. Eventually, I saw my family less and less. The guilt from David outweighed the guilt from them. At least my parents understood when I canceled. David made sure I paid for it. So by year 6, it was just me and David, which I think was his plan all along. The financial control got worse. "We can't afford that right now," became David's favorite phrase, usually delivered while he unpacked another expensive gadget or designer watch. When my mother needed help with medical bills, nothing huge, just $2,000 for a procedure her insurance wouldn't cover, I asked David if we could help. "We're not a charity, Angela," he said, not even looking up from his phone. "Your parents made their financial decisions. That's not our responsibility." "She's my mother. And you're my wife. Your loyalty should be to our household first." I ended up secretly selling some of my old jewelry to help her. When David noticed a missing bracelet months later, I lied and said I'd lost it. The disappointment in his eyes made me feel like a criminal, even though I was helping my own mother with my own belongings. Except they weren't my belongings anymore, were they? Everything was ours, which somehow meant everything was his. I couldn't buy a coffee without justifying it. I couldn't get my hair cut without approval. The one time I splurged on a new dress, on sale, $25, David reviewed the bank statement and gave me a lecture about unnecessary spending that lasted 40 minutes. Meanwhile, he bought a $4,000 set of golf clubs. "It's different," he explained when I pointed out the hypocrisy. "This is an investment in my career. Networking on the golf course leads to deals. Your dress just sits in a closet." The logic was absurd, but by that point, I'd lost the energy to argue. Around year 8, David started coming home later and later. "Client dinners," he'd explain, smelling of expensive cologne and scotch. "Sorry, honey, it's just part of the job." Then it was weekend emergency meetings that coincided with me planning things I wanted to do together. "I thought we were going to see that movie today," I'd say. "Angela, this is my career. You know how important this promotion is. I can't just blow off the senior partners because you want to see some romantic comedy." I wasn't even suggesting romantic comedies. I'd suggested a documentary about financial fraud that I thought he'd enjoy. But in David's mind, anything I wanted was trivial by definition. He stopped touching me too, not just sexually, though that had dwindled to maybe once a month, perfunctory and disconnected, but casually. No more hand-holding, no more kisses goodbye. I'd become furniture in my own marriage. "What did you even do today?" became his daily greeting when he walked in the door. I'd spent 8 hours cleaning, grocery shopping, preparing a meal he'd barely touch, managing every aspect of our household. But somehow, David's tone made it clear that my answer would never be enough. The usual, I'd say, because listing my accomplishments only led to him explaining why they didn't count as real work. One night, I tried to initiate sex. David looked at me like I'd asked him to solve a complicated math problem. "I'm exhausted, Angela, not tonight." But he wasn't too exhausted to stay up until midnight scrolling through his phone, occasionally laughing at something on the screen. I felt invisible. No, worse than invisible. I felt like a burden he was too polite to throw away. The company Christmas party in year 11 was when I finally understood how completely I'd disappeared. David's company always went all out. Black tie event at a fancy hotel, open bar, the works. I'd spent 2 weeks finding a dress David would approve of. Elegant, but not too sexy. Expensive looking, but on sale. Current, but not trendy. I'd walked a tightrope of his contradictory requirements and somehow succeeded. "You look nice," he said when I came downstairs. Not beautiful or stunning. Nice. The kind of compliment you'd give to a reasonably clean public restroom. At the party, David introduced me to his new boss, Richard Henderson himself. "This is my wife, Angela," David said with that corporate smile. "She keeps the home fires burning while I handle the real work." Richard chuckled. I smiled my invisible smile. Then David introduced me to his secretary, Sarah. She was 26, blonde, and laughed like tinkling bells. I disliked her immediately, which made me feel like a terrible person. It wasn't her fault David hired someone young and pretty. Except the way she looked at him, the way he looked at her. Oh, I spent the entire evening watching David and Sarah orbit each other like binary stars. He fetched her drinks. She laughed at everything he said. They stood just a little too close when discussing the Henderson account, their heads bent together in conspiratorial intimacy. I sat alone at our table, eating overpriced chicken and feeling like an idiot. At one point, I got up and tried to join their conversation. David was explaining some complex financial strategy, and I actually understood it. It was similar to something I'd studied in college. "That's interesting," I said. "It sounds like you're using a modified version of the honey," David interrupted, not even looking at me. "This is about the Henderson account. You wouldn't understand the nuances." Sarah smirked. Actually smirked. I went back to my table and spent the rest of the party wondering how I'd become this person. This silent, shrinking woman who apologized for existing. When we got home that night, David was energized in a way I hadn't seen in years. He talked about work, about his chances for promotion, about Sarah's brilliant analysis of the Henderson portfolio. He talked about Sarah a lot. I went to bed alone, listening to him take a late-night conference call that involved a lot of laughter. That was the night I first suspected he was cheating. But I didn't have proof. And without proof, confronting him would just be me being paranoid and insecure. So I waited and watched and slowly gathered evidence of my own irrelevance. The signs were all there, obvious in retrospect. David started working even later, until 10, 11 p.m. Weekend emergency meetings became routine. He bought new clothes, nicer cologne, started going to the gym again after years of claiming he was too busy. "Someone's looking handsome," I said once, trying to flirt with my own husband. "Just trying to stay professional," he replied, as if looking good for me wasn't worth the effort. His phone became surgically attached to his hand. He took it to the bathroom, to bed, even to the kitchen when making his morning coffee. The screen always tilted away from me. Passwords changed monthly. I could have been noble about it. I could have confronted him, demanded honesty, respected his privacy. But nobility doesn't give you evidence, and evidence was what I needed. So I did something I'm not proud of. I checked his laptop. David had forgotten to close it one night after another late client dinner. He was in the shower, washing off the smell of whatever restaurant he'd actually been to. The computer sat there on the kitchen counter, screen glowing with opportunity. My hands were shaking as I opened his messages. I didn't have to look far. The conversation with Sarah was right there. Hundreds of messages going back months. "Can't stop thinking about last night. David. Best weekend of my life. Sarah. My wife is visiting her parents. Come over Friday? David. Can't wait to get rid of the wife and be with you properly. David to Sarah discussing their future. I read every message, every explicit detail, every plan they'd made. Every time David had lied to me about his whereabouts, he'd been with her. The hotel receipt I'd found in his pocket last month, a romantic weekend while I'd been told he was at a conference. The lipstick on his collar I'd convinced myself I was imagining, real, and not my shade. All those late nights, all those client dinners, all those times he'd made me feel crazy for being suspicious. I wasn't crazy. I was married to a liar who was systematically erasing me from his life while I kept his house clean. I sat in our kitchen, my pristine, perfect kitchen that I'd spent 12 years maintaining, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. Not sadness, not even hurt, really. Those emotions required surprise, and honestly, I wasn't surprised. Disappointed in myself for not seeing it sooner, maybe, but not surprised. No. What I felt was cold, crystalline rage. For 12 years, I'd made myself smaller and smaller to fit into David's perfect life performance. I'd given up my career, my friends, my family, my identity. I'd become the devoted wife who made him look stable and successful to his colleagues, and he'd been planning to trade me in for a newer model the entire time. I carefully closed the laptop and went to bed. David came in smelling of soap and cologne, kissed my forehead like a father tucking in a child, and fell asleep within minutes. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, planning. Here's what I knew about David. He valued his professional reputation above everything. Above me, certainly. Above love, ethics, basic human decency. His career was his identity, which meant his career was his weakness. I spent 2 weeks researching my options. Divorce lawyers, financial advisors, private investigators. I documented everything, his spending, the affair evidence, 12 years of financial control that bordered on economic abuse. But I wanted more than a fair divorce settlement. I wanted David to feel what I'd felt for 12 years, humiliated, powerless, invisible. Then I found Candy. Her website was explicit. Corporate Humiliation Specialist was her actual job title, which I have to respect for its honesty. She specialized in what she called outrageous encounters, showing up at office buildings, causing scenes, making executives wish they'd never left home that morning. Perfect. I called her from a coffee shop, using a disposable phone I'd bought with cash from my grocery budget. Thank you, David, for teaching me to be creative with limited resources. So let me get this straight, Candy said, her voice cheerful and professional. You want me to show up at your husband's office, looking as inappropriate as possible, and ask for him by name? During his most important meeting of the year, I confirmed. The quarterly board review. Every executive in the company will be there. Ooh, I like you, Candy laughed. What's the budget? $500, cash. Honey, for $500 and a cheating husband, I'll give you the deluxe show. We planned every detail. Candy would wear her most outrageous outfit. Hot pink everything, 6-inch heels, adult toys visible in her oversized bag. She'd announce loudly that she had a special appointment with David Miller, describe their alleged arrangement in vivid detail, and refuse to leave until David honors his commitment. What if security throws me out? Candy asked. They will, I said. But by then, everyone will have heard. And trust me, in a company like Henderson Financial, that kind of scandal doesn't disappear. You're diabolical, Candy said admiringly. I respect that. I enlisted my brother Mike to help. The brother David had always dismissed as unsuccessful because Mike chose to be a teacher instead of chasing corporate dollars. Mike was thrilled to finally get revenge on the man who'd condescended to him for over a decade. I'll be your accomplice any day, Mike said. What do you need? Help coordinating timing, someone to verify David's location, and a getaway driver after I watch the show. Angela Parker, criminal mastermind, Mike grinned. I knew you were still in there somewhere. The plan was set for Tuesday at 2 p.m. David had mentioned the board review meeting months ago, practically salivating over the promotion opportunity it represented. All the executives would be in that conference room, including Sarah. I positioned myself in a coffee shop across the street with a perfect view of Henderson Financial's marble lobby. My phone was charged and ready. I'd even bought a new outfit for the occasion. A nice dress, on sale, that I hadn't asked David's permission to purchase. Small rebellions. At 1:58 p.m., my phone buzzed. Mike, target confirmed in conference room. You're a go. At 2 p.m., I watched Candy strut through those revolving doors in her 6-inch hot pink heels, and I smiled for the first time in months. From my window seat, I couldn't hear what Candy was saying, but I didn't need to. Her body language told the whole story. She click-clacked across that marble lobby like she owned the place, her hot pink outfit practically glowing under the fluorescent lights. The security guard's face went from professional to horrified in approximately 2.5 seconds. I watched as Candy gestured emphatically, apparently explaining her appointment. She pulled out her phone, probably showing the fake booking confirmation Mike had created. The guard shook his head. Candy gestured more intensely. Then she pointed at the elevator and started walking toward it. The guard followed, clearly panicking. Candy made it into an elevator before he could stop her. I imagined the conversation happening in that ascending box, Candy cheerfully explaining David's alleged requests, the guard trying to figure out what the hell protocol was for this situation, other passengers slowly dying of second-hand embarrassment. My phone buzzed. Mike had infiltrated the lobby. He'd borrowed a suit and walked in like he belonged there. Smart kid, my brother. She's heading to the executive floor. This is beautiful. Are people recording? I texted back. Oh, honey, so many phones are out. This is going viral. Perfect. I sipped my coffee and waited. 15 minutes later, Mike sent me a video. I put in my earbuds and watched my marriage end in glorious high definition. The video started mid-scene. Candy in the executive hallway, her voice carrying like a foghorn. Has anyone seen David Miller? He specifically requested the deluxe package, and I'm not leaving until we complete our transaction. Professional employees in suits froze like deer in headlights. One woman clutched her purse like Candy might snatch it. A young analyst looked like he was trying to become one with the wall. Candy approached a senior-looking executive. "Excuse me, sir, are you David Miller? Because I have handcuffs, a whip, and several other items he specifically requested for our session today." The executive turned bright red. Oh, honey, don't be shy." Candy patted his arm. "I'm a professional, no judgment. Where's David? I need to provide the services he paid for." Behind her, phones were emerging from pockets. People were recording. This was actually happening. Then the conference room door opened. David stepped out, probably to see what the commotion was. His face when he saw Candy was everything I'd dreamed it would be. Confusion, then recognition that something was very wrong, then pure, undiluted horror. "Are you David Miller?" Candy asked brightly, approaching him with purpose. What? No. Yes, but..." "Finally!" Candy clapped her hands. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Now, about your special requests. You wanted the handcuffs and role-play scenario, correct? I brought the police officer outfit and the..." "I don't know what you're talking about," David said, his voice strangled. Behind him, executives were emerging from the conference room, including Richard Henderson himself. And Sarah. Sarah looked like she wanted to evaporate. "Sir, I have your booking confirmation right here." Candy pulled out her phone. "David Miller, Henderson Financial, deluxe package for Tuesday at 2 p.m. You even specified that you wanted me to be as inappropriate as possible because you like the humiliation aspect. That's not..." "I never..." David's face had gone from white to red to purple. Richard Henderson cleared his throat. "David, what is going on?" "I have no idea," David practically shouted. "I don't know this woman." "That's what they all say," Candy sighed dramatically. "Look, I'm a professional. I don't do the whole pretend we don't know each other game unless you pay extra. You owe me $500 for my time and..." "Security!" David yelled. 2 security guards emerged from the elevators, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Candy put up her hands. Fine. But David Miller, you still owe me money. This is breach of contract." As they escorted her toward the elevator, Candy called over her shoulder. "I'll be leaving a review online about this. Not professional at all." The elevator doors closed. The hallway went silent. David stood in front of his entire executive team, his boss, his colleagues, his secretary/mistress, trying to explain the unexplainable. "I swear to God, I have no idea who that woman was," he said, his voice shaking. "Someone is setting me up." Richard Henderson's face was unreadable. "Let's discuss this in my office, David." Sarah had already disappeared, probably texting her resume to every competitor in the city. The video ended. I sat in that coffee shop, finished my coffee, and felt lighter than I had in 12 years. By the time I got home, the videos were everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Someone had posted it to LinkedIn with the caption, "This is why we need better office security." Twitter was having a field day. The company's subreddit was melting down. One industrious soul had even created a TikTok with dramatic music. David Miller, rising star of Henderson Financial, had become a meme. I was folding laundry, old habits die hard, when David came home at 4:30 p.m., the earliest he'd been home in months. He looked destroyed. Suit rumpled, tie loose, hair disheveled. For a moment, I almost felt bad for him. Almost. "What happened?" I asked innocently, not looking up from my folding. "Someone," his voice cracked, "someone hired an escort to humiliate me. At work. During the board review. It's everywhere, Angela. Everyone saw it. Richard pulled me into his office and..." He sat down heavily on the couch. "The promotion is gone. They're talking about company image and professional conduct reviews." "That's terrible," I said, achieving a tone of concern that would have won me an Oscar. "Sarah broke up with me." I paused mid-fold. "Sarah?" David looked up, realizing his mistake. His face went through several emotions in quick succession: panic, guilt, resignation. "You knew," he said quietly. "Of course I knew." I set down the shirt I was folding and finally looked at him. "David, I'm not an idiot. I've been not an idiot for 12 years. I just pretended to be because that's what you wanted." "Angela, I can explain." "Don't." I walked to the kitchen and retrieved a folder I'd hidden under the coffee maker. I printed these out because I'm old-fashioned that way. I handed him the divorce papers. David stared at them like they were written in ancient Greek. "What?" "I've also frozen our joint accounts and transferred half of everything to an account in my name. My lawyer assures me that given your affair and 12 years of financial control that borders on economic abuse, I'm entitled to significantly more. But I'm not greedy. I just want what's mine." "You can't." "I already did. This morning, actually, while you were at your very important meeting." I smiled. It felt good, smiling for real. "Oh, and about that escort? I have copies of all the videos. Lots of copies. In multiple locations. So if you're thinking about making this divorce difficult, just remember, it could get so much worse." David's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "You did this? You hired that woman?" "Her name is Candy, and she's surprisingly professional. I'd recommend her services, but I don't think you'll be needing them anymore." "Why?" David looked genuinely confused, which might have been the most insulting part. "Why would you?" "Because for 12 years you made me feel worthless," I said, my voice steady. "You took away my career, my friends, my family, my money, my dignity. You made me ask permission to buy coffee. You joked about my intelligence in public. You treated me like a servant while you fucked your secretary." David flinched at the language. Good. He should flinch. "And you know what the worst part was? You did it all so reasonably, so gradually. You never hit me, never even yelled that much. You just dismantled me, piece by piece, until I forgot I was a person outside of being your wife. I gave you everything. You gave me nothing." My voice rose for the first time. "You gave me an allowance and criticism and contempt disguised as care. You gave me a prison with nice furniture. So you destroyed my career?" David's shock was giving way to anger now. "That's your revenge?" "No, David. That's you destroying your own career." I picked up another shirt to fold, my hands steadier than I'd expected. "You're the one who cheated. You're the one who built your entire professional image on being stable and trustworthy while lying to everyone. I just gave people a peek behind the curtain." "You're insane." "Maybe," I shrugged. "Or maybe I finally woke up. Either way, you need to pack your things. My brother is coming by in an hour to make sure you leave peacefully." "This is my house." "It's our house, which means it's my house too. And according to my lawyer, given the circumstances, I have every right to ask you to leave while we sort out the divorce." I handed him a garbage bag. "You can start with your closet." David looked at the bag, at me, at the divorce papers still in his hand. For the first time in 12 years, he had no plan, no control, no clever argument. "I could destroy you," he said quietly. I pulled out my phone and opened one of the videos. "I have insurance, and it's already viral, David. What are you going to do that's worse than what you've already done to yourself?" He had no answer. An hour later, David left our house with 3 garbage bags of belongings and the shell-shocked expression of a man whose entire world had imploded. I locked the door behind him and sat down in my pristine, perfect kitchen. Then I cried. Not from sadness, from relief. For the first time in 12 years, I was alone in my house, and it felt like freedom. The first month after David left was weird. I kept expecting him to come home. I'd cook dinner for 2, then remember. I'd leave his side of the bed untouched, then remember. Old habits, old patterns. 12 years doesn't just evaporate overnight. But slowly, I started to change things. I bought bright yellow curtains for the living room. David had always insisted on tasteful neutrals, but I liked color. I rearranged the furniture. I left dishes in the sink overnight just because I could. Small rebellions became bigger ones. I enrolled in online business classes. It had been 12 years since I'd flexed those muscles, but apparently it was like riding a bike. A bike that had better technology now, but still, fundamentally, the same. I called my old friend Jessica. "I know it's been years," I said when she answered, "but I owe you an explanation and an apology." We met for coffee. I explained everything. The control, the isolation, the systematic dismantling of my identity. Jessica cried. Then she got angry on my behalf, which felt surprisingly healing. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because I didn't realize how bad it was until I was out of it," I said, honestly. "And because I was ashamed." "You have nothing to be ashamed of. I know that now." Jessica became my first friend in the new chapter. Then there were others. Women I met in my business classes, neighbors I'd been too afraid to talk to because David didn't approve, connections from my old life who welcomed me back without judgment. I started to remember who I'd been before David, and I started to become someone new. My brother Mike became my business partner. "You're good at this," he said, reviewing my business plan for a consulting company. Like, scary good. "Why did you ever stop working?" Long story involving a manipulative husband and my own stupidity. "Hey," Mike squeezed my shoulder, "you weren't stupid. You were trapped. There's a difference." We launched Parker & Associates 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Small at first, just me, Mike, and determination. We specialized in helping small businesses with organization, management, and efficiency. Turns out, 12 years of managing every aspect of a household while on a restrictive budget had taught me skills that translated perfectly to business. Who knew? Our first client was a small boutique drowning in disorganization. I came in, assessed the situation, created systems that made sense. Within 3 months, their efficiency had increased by 40%. Word spread, we got more clients, I hired an assistant. Then another. Within a year, we had a small office and a reputation for turning chaos into order. I was good at this, really good, and I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be good at something. I ran into Sarah at a coffee shop 14 months after the divorce. She was alone, looking tired and significantly less polished than the glowing secretary I remembered. When she saw me, she froze. "Angela," she said quietly. "Hi." "Sarah." I kept my voice neutral. "I'm sorry," she blurted out. "I know that doesn't mean anything, but I am. I was young and stupid, and I thought—" She stopped. "I thought David was something he wasn't." "He's very good at that," I said dryly. "Can I tell you something?" Sarah asked. "After everything happened, after we actually tried being together, he was exactly the same with me. Controlling, critical, always finding fault. It took me 3 months to realize he didn't actually love me. He loved the idea of trading up to a younger model. I felt a strange pang of sympathy for her. Did he critique your spending? Constantly. And my clothes. And my intelligence. Sarah laughed bitterly. I guess I got to experience 12 years of Angela's life in fast forward. "I'm sorry that happened to you," I said, and meant it. I deserved it. I knew he was married. Maybe. I gathered my things to leave. But nobody deserves to be made to feel worthless. Not even people who make bad choices. Sarah looked at me with something like hope. Are you okay now?" I thought about my business, my friends, my small but bright apartment that was completely mine. I thought about having my own bank account, making my own decisions, wearing whatever I wanted. "Yeah," I said. "I'm actually better than okay." 2 years after the divorce, I bought my first house. Not ours, mine. It was small, just 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, a backyard that was more overgrown garden than lawn. But it was mine. My name on the deed, my mortgage, my home. I cried when I got the keys. Happy tears this time. I started dating again, too, which was terrifying. My first date in 15 years was with a man named Marcus, who taught high school history. He split the check without being asked, listened when I talked, and didn't once try to explain my own experiences to me. On our third date, I told him about David. "That must have been incredibly difficult," Marcus said. Not, "Why didn't you leave sooner?" or "I would never do that." Just acknowledgement of what I'd been through. "It was," I said, "but I got out." "You did more than get out," Marcus smiled. "You're thriving. That takes strength." Marcus and I dated for 6 months before I realized something. I didn't need him. I liked him, enjoyed his company, appreciated his kindness, but I didn't need him to complete me or validate my existence. I was complete on my own. That realization felt like winning a prize I didn't know I was competing for. 3 years after the divorce, my business was thriving. We'd grown to 10 employees. We'd been featured in a local business magazine. My mother proudly showed the article to everyone at her church. I kept one video from that day on my phone. Not for revenge anymore. David had faded into irrelevance. Last I heard, he was working at a smaller firm in a different city, starting over. I kept it as a reminder that I had been strong enough to save myself when no one else would, that I had taken my pain and turned it into power, that I had refused to stay invisible. Sometimes when I had a hard day or questioned my decisions, I'd watch it and remember. I did that. I planned it, executed it, survived it. If I could do that, I could do anything. 4 years after the divorce, I got a message from a woman named Jennifer. "I hope this isn't weird," she wrote, "but I saw your story online. Someone posted about it in a support group for financial abuse survivors. I'm in the same situation you were in. My husband controls everything. I have no money, no friends, no way out. I just wanted to ask, how did you do it?" I stared at that message for a long time. Then I called her. We talked for 2 hours. I told her about secret bank accounts and documenting everything. I told her about lawyers who specialized in domestic abuse cases because, yes, financial control is abuse. I told her about the first terrifying steps toward freedom. "I'm scared," Jennifer said. "That's normal," I replied. I was terrified. But you know what I realized? I was more scared of staying than leaving. And that's when I knew I was ready. "Did the revenge thing help?" she asked. "The public humiliation?" I thought about it carefully. Honestly, the revenge was satisfying in the moment. It felt good to watch him squirm after years of making me feel small. But the real victory wasn't embarrassing him. It was everything that came after. Building a life where I didn't need to make anyone else small to feel big. "But the revenge was pretty epic," Jennifer laughed through tears. "Oh, it absolutely was," I agreed. "I'm not going to lie and pretend otherwise. Watching 12 years of arrogance crumble in under 10 minutes? Chef's kiss. But the freedom is better than the revenge. Trust me." Jennifer called me back 2 months later to tell me she'd left. 6 months after that, she sent me a picture of her new apartment. A year later, she'd started her own business. She wasn't my only call. Word spread somehow, probably through support groups and online forums. Women started reaching out, asking how I'd done it, asking for advice on leaving, asking if they were crazy for thinking their situation was bad. "You're not crazy," I told each one. "And yes, it's bad. And yes, you can leave. And yes, it's worth it." I started volunteering with a financial abuse awareness organization. I gave talks at community centers about warning signs, the gradual control, the isolation, the systematic dismantling of identity disguised as care. The thing about abusers, I'd tell audiences, is that they're rarely obvious. They don't usually hit you or scream at you. Sometimes they're charming. Sometimes they're successful. Sometimes they make everyone else think you're lucky to have them. "So how do you know?" someone always asked. Ask yourself, do you have to ask permission for normal things? Do you feel like you're walking on eggshells? Do you apologize constantly for existing? Do you feel smaller than you used to be? Hands would go up, nods of recognition, sometimes tears. "Here's what I want you to know," I'd continue. "You are not responsible for changing them. You are not responsible for fixing them. You are only responsible for saving yourself, and you are worth saving." This became my new purpose, not revenge, redemption, turning my pain into something that helped others escape theirs. 5 years after the divorce, I was happy. Not compared to how miserable I was happy, just genuinely happy. I woke up in my own house, in my own bed, making my own decisions. I went to work at a business I'd built from nothing. I had friends who knew the real me. I had a family I could see whenever I wanted. I had autonomy. I could buy coffee without guilt. I could express opinions without fear. I could take up space in the world without apologizing for it. Some nights I still had dreams about being back in that marriage. I'd wake up panicking, thinking David was in the next room, about to criticize me for something. Then I'd remember, I was free. He was gone. That life was over. The dreams were getting less frequent. I saw David once at a restaurant. He was with a woman, not Sarah, someone new, younger. She was laughing at something he said, hanging on his words. He looked older, tired, less arrogant than I remembered. For a moment, I considered warning her. Then I realized she had to figure it out on her own, just like I did. We all have to save ourselves. David saw me, too. Our eyes met across the restaurant. I smiled, not cruel, not kind, just neutral acknowledgement of his existence, and turned back to my own dinner with my own friends. He didn't matter to me anymore. That felt like winning.